Welcome to the Wayfinder Podcast, hosted by Sofar Ocean. Today, we'll be talking to Sofar's Senior Routing Specialist, Jessica Topal. We'll be discussing what uncertainty means and what it looks like in the shipping and maritime industry today. And this uncertainty is really multifaceted. We're talking through uncertainty in shifting routes, changing weathers, and extra stress and demand on fuel strategies. Jessica dives into how you make the right decision when there isn't one clear answer. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Jessica, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Now, could you tell us a bit about your background and the focus of your work at Sofar?
Sure. So I started my career as a meteorologist. I went to school. I always loved the weather. And then after graduation, I transitioned right into a routing role. And I did it for the past almost 11 years. So my job consists of looking at ships every day, looking at their routes, their routes with the most recent forecast data, looking at fuel savings, distance, ETA, environmental factors, and suggesting either a new route or continuing to suggest the same route, just monitoring the ship's routes daily.
That's a lot to bear in mind. And we're seeing a lot of it at the moment. Your fleet operators are under huge commercial pressure right now. I mean, how's that showing up in the routing decisions that you and your team are making? And sort of what are the conversations you're having about voyage planning that are preeminent right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversations, a lot of back and forth. Our job sometimes seems to be somewhat of a middleman in between ship captains and clients and operators. A lot of the conversation has to do with RTAs and ETAs getting to the ship's destination on time. For whatever cargo they have schedules at their destination. So that is where a lot of pressure definitely comes into play. Um, so we have to take that into account when we're looking at weather, because they have to sometimes go slower and they
Of
have
course.
later ETAs. Sometimes they have to go faster and then they're there too early. This all comes into play when we're deciding what route to send them on every day. But you need constant communication in order to keep everyone involved with the planning.
When these changes happen, whether that's trade patterns, route viability, fuel economics, how quickly do those show up, in your planning, and in the conversations you're having? Is it overnight, or does it tend to be a bit more of a longer stretch of time?
Yeah. No, it depends. It depends on how fast the weather is fluctuating. Sometimes you
Hmm.
have very sensitive situations that need to be looked at, 4 times a day. Other times, most of the time, it's usually once a day. You're taking into account like fresh weather data, and seeing if we can do anything different in that regard. So we have the unique advantage of looking at routes every day. So
Hmm.
this puts us in a really great spot to kind of watch fluctuations in forecasts and give like the most up-to-date suggestions that we can give.
And how often does that happen? Presumably, most operators are looking to get that information at least daily, but are some of them looking for it, more frequently than that?
Yeah, it's usually daily because we don't want to be sending too many suggestions, too many different routes with
Of
every
course.
weather update, because that could get a little bit confusing. Um, yeah, daily would be probably the most frequent because we want to make sure that, we can have trust with our decision making as well as, letting the forecast play out.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're adapting those voyage plans, what are the sort of workflows you and the team go through, to change them? How's that information coming in? How's it being filtered? And how do you get to the right output?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we see like for example a heavy weather pattern, we will kind of make plans ahead of time. We can foresee how certain weather patterns are going to play out or how they could play out. And so we want to set everyone up for success, right? So we will
Absolutely.
often provide a plan to the captains and operators, showing them these are the potential outcomes that could happen if a certain forecast plays out. And
Mhm.
so doing that often at the start of the voyage, or maybe let's say 5 days ahead of a potential system, doing that really gives us a good base to check these routes daily, to check these options that we provided. And it gives also, our end users trust that we can, okay, if this happens, we do have a way out. It's not like we're saying, oh, well, this is going to work and just follow us blindly. It's like, no, if
Yeah.
we understand things can happen. And so we have options. We want to show them to you. We're being transparent, communicative. It's a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. And in times like these, their operating procedures, their safety limits must be changing pretty rapidly too. So having those kind of conversations, making sure that everything's aligned, yeah, is incredibly important. Situation in the Strait of Hormuz at the moment. Are you seeing a lot of our clients rerouting either around the Cape of Good Hope or in other directions?
Yeah, we've seen many ships diverting to the Cape of Good Hope, especially if they were on their way to the Strait of Hormuz. A lot of them have been drifting, and so we're just kind of waiting until they give us the go to give us a new route. And right now, it hasn't been too bad with the weather down there. Of course, that will change once winter comes, but for now, it hasn't been much of a struggle on our end to, kind of accept the new routes and just kind of roll with the punches.
Excellent. Now, of course, the Southern Ocean in winter is one of the most tempestuous uh, climates out there. And on top of that, of course, there's not a huge amount of bunkering facilities in Africa, certainly at the sort of scale and size that many of our carriers are used to. When you're doing those rerouting decisions, how big, an issue is that ability to bunker at the moment, or their fuel economics?
Yeah, this is huge because, it's such a long way to go from somewhere like Singapore to South America. So you have to definitely plan the voyage. And it's very hard, especially in the winter when you have these systems just persistently hitting the coast of South Africa. So this is where we definitely will be using, our ability to give options and to be looking at these forecasts daily to make sure that, they're sailing within any window, any safe window they can get to go somewhere like Port Elizabeth, or making sure talking to the operators ahead of time, making sure that they have sufficient fuel to get from South America to Singapore.
So when these changes, in route planning occur, are there any hidden costs or any sort of counterintuitive learnings that can crop up?
Yeah, so there can be things as simple as just a normal destination change, which happens like
Mhm.
very often, especially with longer routes. And that is just going to inevitably cause, a change in distance, maybe unexpected costs. But then you have things like tropical systems that will definitely derail what an original plan.
Mhm.
Um, you have situations where maybe the operators or the ship captain wanted to try sailing a more aggressive route, maybe a route that looked good at the time to sail through, and then you realize, oh no, like like systems are actually developing, so we need to, really dive south, or we need to slow down like significantly, or add distance by going and drifting somewhere. Um, those instances they're where they're common, they definitely do add, I guess, unexpected costs. I mean, sometimes for
Mhm.
routers, we can kind of see like the writing on the wall. We can kind of see if like, oh, they're gonna try to go for it, then maybe we're gonna have to make some slight adjustments along the way. But yeah, there's lots of hidden things that can be happening constantly that is just changing. That's why you have to stay on your toes with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's when a lot of the value of having routers on the Sofar team who've sailed at sea and have seen these things in real life comes into play.
Yeah, 100%. It's great to have them for their insight.
Okay. And in terms of, talking a bit more about the uncertainty, whether that's the commercial, environmental, operational, are these dealt with individually, or do they all sort of are they all locked in together now and you have to deal with them, as one challenge?
Um, I mean, it's kind of fluid. You have different concerns coming from different places, whether
Hmm.
it's, the time constraint of getting to a port at a certain time, or, the ship captain is like, "Oh, I've always done this route. This is what works best. I'm going to do this regardless." You really just have to make sure there's synergy in those moments. You're not going to tell any which person what they have to do. At the end of
Hmm.
the day, it's a ship captain's job to sail the ship. They have the final say. So if there's anything that's out of the scope of weather, we kind of leave that to the operators and captains to discuss.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
it's an interesting point you make about um, the ship captain saying that this is the route I've always sailed. I'm familiar with this. Could you talk us a little bit about sort of that process of building trust with a captain? How do you, with any new system, I imagine it's, very difficult being on board a ship. You've got an awful lot of data points, an awful lot of information coming your way. How do you get to that point where they go, yeah, so far knows what they're doing. These are the value that they can provide for us. I trust them. I believe in them.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's definitely a trial and error process, but I
Mhm.
think that us over communicating, I mean, not even over communicating, just being transparent with our thought process has gone a long way in the past. Whether it's, over explaining the weather situation and including details that maybe you wouldn't always include, like currents and like angle of approach
Mm.
of the waves. Those can be really helpful details. And, if that doesn't work, a phone call conversation can go like a long distance, talking human to
Yeah,
human. I think that you can kind of like in email, sometimes that can get lost, but having those like open dialogue and phone conversation, I mean, it's pretty easy to come to a common like understanding at that point.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the old school ways are often the best.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
simplicity of it all.
Yeah.
Um, Now, when a vessel's on a non-optimal route due to those external pressures we've just talked about, what sort of difference does the quality of ocean data make?
Well, of course, having good ocean data will help make for hopefully more reliable forecasts and less large fluctuations. Say if one day the position of a storm is like super far northwest, and then the next day you sign on and it's super southwest. If you have less of that fluctuating, you can have more trust in the forecast that you're putting out to the ship. So less need to provide as many alternative options, whether that's like 5 days in advance or 3 days in advance or even 2 days in advance. I guess it's just more trust with having more data. It helps you be more predictable in the land of unpredictability.
Absolutely. And that's a unique advantage for so far, isn't it? Having our system, our spotters in all the major trade lanes. We're able to see a lot of things that, other providers can't.
Yeah, I think one of our biggest advantages with our team is that we are looking at these ships every single day. So, what forecasts do fluctuate daily. They fluctuate over 3 or 4 days. But looking at it every day, seeing the patterns, a lot of us will
Mhm.
look at the same ships day after day too. We can kind of see how things are playing out, and it paints a really clear picture for the voyage as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And being able to give them that granular data, the difference in wave height, at a very practical, useful level, it must be great, for those seafarers, able to route around the most difficult conditions and, have a better experience on board.
Yeah, yeah. It's good to give them as much information as possible, honestly.
If elevated uncertainty becomes the new normal rather than a temporary spike, what is the one capability or mindset shift that maritime leaders need most?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's something that, leaders of all sorts need to keep in mind, and especially here, is that
Mhm.
safety will always come first. I think above all else, we need to make sure that in our communication, that everyone's comfortable. These people are out at sea, so having that in mind before anything else is definitely the most important. And then also like keeping the planet in mind. You're trying to you reduce fuel, reduce waste into the ocean. This is all something that we're keeping in the forefront over things like profit. Of course, we want to achieve all of the outcomes we can. But yeah, if we just keep that in mind as like our North Star, I feel like, yeah, I think that's the best way of handling it.
Absolutely. And a more fulfilling way of doing it, knowing that you're doing good and creating good. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I have a lot of pride in that, honestly.
Thanks, Jessica. What an engaging and interesting conversation. What really stood out to me is that the uncertainty isn't just more, it's different. And it's really shifting how we approach voyage optimization and routing today. We need better weather, more ocean intelligence to make the right decisions when it matters most. If you like today's episode, please follow along and subscribe for the next one. If you're interested in how Sofar approaches these challenges, you can find more through the links below. Thanks for listening.